Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives are losing badly in the polls right now. And while there are some prominent supporters of Pierre who have started to come to terms with it, there is still a growing number of Conservatives who have started to come out and voice their distrust in the polls that put them in second place in this election cycle. And if there's one thing that is my biggest pet peeve when it comes to politics, it would be polling and election deniers. So let's talk about it. But before I do, as always, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel as I continue to cover the interesting stories that emerge in this Canadian federal election cycle. So let's get into it. So I've been noticing a very concerning pattern about Conservatives in Canada, where they have started talking about the polls being fake and bought by the liberal media. It's pretty hard not to stumble across this discourse, especially if you're as invested in the Canadian elections as I happen to be. In fact, I can't even escape it in my own comment section in videos where I'm just reporting 338 Canada's polling averages in the most unbiased way possible. So I decided to spend the last week compiling a list of tweets that I found, and let's see if you can find a pattern in them. Prove me wrong, one of the Liberal Party's largest costs for this election is paying for polls. Obviously. Now, I just find it funny that the same pollsters who have been predicting the biggest Conservative landslide for a good part of the last year and a half are somehow bought and paid for by the Liberal Party. Surely if these pollsters were paid by the Liberal Party, they would have just shown the Liberals ahead all throughout the last 2 years, and we might still have Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, right? I mean, why go through the hassle of having him resign and have a whole new leader take over the Liberal Party if you can just fake the polls and keep the current leader in power? So what's up with the polls? Are their algorithms just off? Are they inadvertently oversampling people who happen to vote Liberal? Are they intentionally skewing the results? Now, this is perhaps the heart of the problem with the Conservatives right now, where their baseline reality is that the Conservatives are bound to win the elections, and that any contradiction to this alternate reality of theirs needs to have an ulterior motive behind it. Funnily enough, I actually agree with the first part of the tweet, and I'm the kind of guy who loves finding stuff through numbers and data, and the numbers are clear in the fact that historically, pollsters have underestimated support for the Conservatives. So yes, the polls are probably oversampling people who happen to vote Liberal, but pollsters have also historically oversampled support for the NDP, which is around 9% support nationally, around a third of what they normally get. Now, this oversampling of Liberal and NDP support and undersampling of Conservative support is pretty documented, and it is because of logistical problems that arise from the fact that it is just much harder to accurately sample people in rural areas who typically vote Conservative because of these areas having less population density and being more remote than urban areas. But even then, this isn't your typical Canadian election. Even if you look at the swing between the predictions made by pollsters and actual results, on average, the Conservative support is underestimated by 1 to 3%, and seeing that the Liberals have a 6% lead over the Conservatives in polling averages, the polls would have to be significantly wrong for the Conservatives to have any chance at forming government. Not only that, but because of the Conservative vote being largely inefficient, even if the Conservatives are ahead of the Liberals in popular vote projections, like they have been for the past 2 election cycles, they might still not win the plurality or even a majority of seats in Parliament, because most of the support is concentrated in Alberta, where they win by crazy margins. That's just not as efficient if you want to translate votes into seats in our parliamentary system. Now, this tweet was so close to being a normal, rational take, but the way the tweet ends make this look like one of those conspiracy theory nut jobs, because it implies that all pollsters are secretly working together to fake the polls. I mean, what could they possibly gain from doing that? Speaking of conspiracy theory nut jobs, let me introduce you to truck driver pleb. Conservative voters received the message loud and clear. Every single Pierre Poilievre rally is smashing attendance records. That is what too big to rig looks like. Sometimes I just feel bad for Pierre Poilievre because he puts in so much effort to distance himself from Trump and MAGA supporters, but then his own supporters say stuff right out of Trump's own playbook. After a point, it's just sad. If you look past the obvious polls of fake and rigged rhetoric, these conservatives get the idea that the team is winning just because of the sizes of Pierre Poilievre's rallies. And truth be told, these rallies do look big, but what does that even mean overall? How many people can you even fit in a rally? The conservatives might make you believe that they can fit 15,000 people in their rallies. The CBC did a really good deep dive on it where they physically counted people from Pierre Poilievre's conservative rallies, and they estimated around 1,500 to 2,000 people in their rallies. I don't know where they get the 15,000 number from. Even if they have 15,000 supporters who show up to their rally, which they really don't have that many, that's still a small fraction of people who will end up voting conservative. So the rallies being big doesn't really mean much in terms of support, and it certainly does not mean anything in terms of how many votes the conservatives are going to get as opposed to how many the liberals will get or the NDP will get. I also saw a really interesting video by Eric Renier, who does these poll averages for the CBC as well. It was a podcast with campaign officials from previous campaigns of leading parties, and they made a good point in mentioning how the rallies are often fabricated and exaggerated, and they use a lot of really well thought out tricks to make it seem like the rallies are bigger and more grand than they are, from lighting to the choice of venue to waiting lines, and even the fact that some rallies even have people bussing in from other locations just so that the area looks more filled out. That really doesn't translate to hard support for any one party in particular, and that certainly does not translate to votes and seats. And I fear that this delusion that a lot of the conservative supporters are going through right now is going to give them a hard reality check by the time election night concludes. And that could be trouble, because the last time we saw something like this was down south in the US in 2020 when Donald Trump refused to accept the election results, and he said that the election was rigged, and his supporters ended up storming the Capitol on January 6, 2021. So let's hope that doesn't get repeated. And now, speaking of Trumpy, MAGA-style conservative supporters, I wanted to talk about one last thing, which is the fact that in one of Pierre Poilievre's rallies, I think it was in Brampton, there were a few people who were spotted wearing shirts that said, "Do you believe in polls?" or something like that. And I feel like when these things kind of escape the digital space into reality, it is something that is kind of concern. The fact that these unhinged people are not just alive in Twitter or YouTube comment sections, but they are alive in person, going to rallies as well, denying the polls. It just feels like they're one step removed from denying the actual election results when it happens. And what happens then when they inevitably get a reality check? What happens when their team doesn't win and they're conditioned to believe that they are supposed to win? What happens then? Do we get a January 6th style insurrection at Parliament Hill? I hope not, but I feel like that's where we're heading. Anyways, I'll leave you with that morbid thought, and I'll see you in the next video. But before I do, please make sure to comment your opinions on this. How do you think this is going to end? What will happen when the Conservatives find out that they are in fact not going to win the elections? Especially those who have been rejecting the poll numbers throughout this election cycle. Anyways, I leave you to those questions, and I'll see you next time with another video.